Recording. Okay, so hello everyone, welcome. We have a few more people joining us. All right, I'm going to pass it over to our first panelist for a quick introduction. His name is Tom Alexander. He is the CEO and co-founder of Holistic. Tom, do you want to say hi to everyone and say anything, maybe a fun fact or anything you'd like to share?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Holistic, as Kat said. Very happy to have you all here. A fun fact about me is that I have twins and another child, but that I'm a twin dad. And also, if you ever take a corporate photo of somebody and they're smiling like this, it means that you hired the wrong person and you got suckered. So.
One second, everyone. Sure. Oh goodness. Okay, I'm trying to find my screen. Let's see.
You got to go back into your Google window, Kat.
Okay, gotcha. There we go. And you all can see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect.
So that means I'm up next?
Yes, perfect.
Thanks, Kat. Hi, I'm Tamaya Arell, and I am the Vice President of Human Resources over at United Way of Metro Chicago. I head up all things talent there, as well as DEI, and super excited to be here today to have this conversation with Holistic and team. Thanks everyone for joining.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Holmes. I am the Senior Manager of Community Engagement, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and just really head up a lot of our internal equity committee, as well as our work with our neighborhood strategy on the South Side of Chicago. I'm excited to be here and excited about this discussion.
I'll just jump in, I guess. Hi, all. I'm Ethne McMiniman, and I am the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at United Way of Metro Chicago. And I also play a dual role as the Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for our statewide association of United Ways. So it's 43 member United Ways around the state of Illinois, and I've been really honored to be able to help us lead this work also at the state level, and a lot of really great conversations happening in other parts of the state, not just the Chicago Metro. And I'm happy to be here with you all today.
Awesome. And then we also have a slide for Cynthia. I think we missed that. So Cynthia, want to make sure that you have the chance to introduce yourself as well.
Absolutely. Hi, Cynthia Rodriguez, Director of Client Services at Holistic. And what that really means is I support our clients in their efforts to focus on the employee experience, particularly from a DEI perspective. So really happy to be here and join in on this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you. It was really nice meeting our panelists for today's discussion. And yeah, just kind of take us back to the screen. Just a quick housewarming thing as a few more people join. I think right now everyone's mics are muted, but if any of the conversation that we have today, you feel compelled to speak up or you have a question, feel free to kind of unmute your mic, kind of jump in there, because we want this to be a very interactive experience for everyone. So yeah, I guess I can stop sharing my screen so that we can all see everyone's faces and then kind of go from there.
So welcome, everybody. We're super excited to have everybody here. Thanks to our panelists from United Way in advance. United Way has been an amazing client for Holistic for the last couple of years. And we've done some really exciting work together. And we've always really admired the organization's focus on racial equity and racial justice. And so that's why this event sort of came together to kind of share some of the things that they've done. And Cynthia from our team is like going to be a co-host of the event as well as a panelist because, you know, Cynthia's got great experience kind of across the board. And so we're excited about that. So let's just dive in. I'll start with kind of the first question, which I'll sort of direct to you, Tamaya, but can be for anybody from United Way.
Sure.
You all were working on this stuff before a lot of the other companies in this country were. So last summer, you know, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd and during the ongoing and necessary racial reckoning, which continues, a lot of companies started to focus on matters of racial equity at work. But you all had been doing it for a long time. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, about your history focusing on the space and some of the things that you all are doing, and kind of how it felt to watch the rest of the nation, you know, start to pay a lot of attention to this type of thing in the workplace when you'd been in this space and pretty active for some time.
Sure. Thanks so much for the question, Tom. I'm always amazed when people call that out to us, because for us, it just seems like the race has been slow and steady. And it's not really a race. Like we look at it as a journey through this racial equity lane that we seem to find ourselves in. And you're right, we were already ahead of what the world is now catching up to back in 2019. In part, that is due to our CEO, when he joined the organization in 2018, he came in the door talking about equity and talking about racial equity and saying that that was going to be a lever that United Way was going to focus on. And from there, our efforts started. We had a lot of work to do on the ground internally, and our focus initially was just on education and having those conversations, making space for those sorts of conversations. I feel really proud about the way that we have been very deliberate with the things that we've been doing. It may not have felt like that to some people, and we have, you know, received criticism that maybe we're not moving fast enough in that lane, but we want to make sure that we're getting it right. It's not a race. We do consider it a journey, and we want to make sure that we're doing it appropriately, with intention, and also with deliberate action toward improving equity in our organization, and as well as with the community partners and working with them in the neighborhoods. And I'll give Jonathan or Ethne a chance to join in on that as well.
Yeah, I think we've been really lucky to just have a lot of strong voices within the organization, kind of helping to push our work forward. We've certainly, you know, we've stumbled and we've kind of, you know, taken a few missteps, but I think the commitment has always been there. I've been with the organization going on 2.5 years, and it was well underway when I arrived. And there's just a lot of good, smart, you know, committed people in the organization wanting to do this work, and really wanting to make sure that before we kind of set ourselves up as any sort of external example around the work, that we're doing our internal work. So work on our own office culture, on our own organizational culture, doing our own learning around racial equity and white supremacy and these sorts of issues. So I think that's strengthened us. I know that there was some tension around that when I first started, but I think in retrospect, that was the right way to focus, sort of inward first and then moving outward.
Yeah,
Go
I would
ahead.
add one thing that's been particularly helpful at the United Way is that the conversations around racial equity and the focus obviously hasn't been perfect, but it has stuck with the priority of just it being seen as a priority. So people from the top down recognize that this is a priority, because oftentimes in organizations that might have a racial equity committee, it's just a committee like any other committee, and they're often viewed as like, this is the committee that talks about race, but it's never, there's no movement around it because people don't see it as a priority. They just see it as a optional thing to do. And what's been really helpful, and I think this past summer only magnified this focus of racial equity being seen as, even if not everyone's a part of the actual working group, it's going to be a part of everyone's work to some degree. And that's been a message that's been communicated even more so. I think it's really helpful and can set the United Way up for long-term success in this work, that it's communicated at the front end that this is a priority. If you work here, this has to be a focus of parts of your work. And so that's something that's been really helpful, and excited to see how that continues to build.
Yeah, like we always say at Holistic that equity is not something that you do from 3:30 to 4:30 on Thursday afternoon during the equity meeting, but that it should be sort of wired into your DNA. Like it's like breathing, right? Like you don't come home at the end of the day and say, I was able to successfully breathe for the whole day today. It just happens. And in the same vein, that's kind of what we're aspiring toward, is that you can treat people equitably for the whole day, and it's not even noticeable because it's part of what you're doing. But obviously we're far from that point. One of the things that struck me about you all was that you had screened the movie 13 as an internal event, which is pretty heavy material. And I really, kind of always admired that you had done that proactively and had made space for that. And so Cynthia, I want to ask you a question as like an HR expert, which is how we're talking about the workplace here and racial equity at work. And my question is, how should people, or first of all, should people think of racial equity at work differently than they think of racial equity in the world? And then if so, how?
I don't really think they should think of it differently. There's always this sort of, and I don't have all the answers. People might disagree with me, but, people have always said this whole separation of church and state, for example. I think it's all part of life, particularly, in today's, climate and where we are in society. We live our lives much of the time through our work. We're wired a certain way, and we're here for something, right? And I think that it all ties together somehow. It might look different how we show up, at work versus in our personal lives, but I think it's all part of the same work. And there absolutely should be a focus on racial equity. I think it starts with just curiosity and empathy, and then taking that a step further to how we communicate it. As we're a human race of people, and so we need to just understand and listen to the perspectives and experiences of other people, so that we get some sort of insight into their lived experience, because otherwise we're just floating around mindlessly.
If I can jump in on that, I think that is absolutely accurate, Cynthia. And I want to piggyback on something that Tom said in terms of putting on your equity hat and not taking it off. I think the events of this summer really forced people to see what we have seen as Black Americans. Like, this has been going on, and it's forced people to now have to put on those glasses. So think about those of us who wear glasses or contacts. When you first put your glasses on, things become crystal clear. You begin to see things differently. And I think what has happened over the summer has forced people to wear glasses. They have to see these things now. And it also has forced them to now ask questions to gain a different perspective. And that's one of the things that we have tried to do internally, is to try to open the conversations, to bring in new perspectives. Everybody doesn't know everything and doesn't have that shared experience. And we want to make a space where people can talk about those differences to get and gain a greater understanding of it, so that we can start to move forward to build more equitable processes and practices across the organization, and then be able to move that work beyond what we're doing internally to our external partners, because they're also starting to reach out now to figure out like what we're doing, how can they take some of the tools that we've been using to bring into their own organizations. And so I think just the events that have manifest themselves has opened everyone's eyes and has forced them to now be able to have those lenses to now see things a bit more clearer.
Is there a part of that, though, that's incredibly frustrating? I mean,
personally, yeah.
Right. Like, and how do you think about that? Because, you're talking about things that you've been experiencing for your whole life, and then you're surrounded by folks or inputs where people are indicating that they only became aware of it 9 months ago or whatever, or whenever they became aware of it, and I guess, on some level it's virtuous to arrive at the party at all, but how do you kind of overcome what I'm sure must be unbelievable frustration that manifests from time to time?
I think personally what I do is try to take it all in and allow for grace for others to gain their own understanding. And if they are being genuine in their empathy and their newfound concern, then allowing them that space to grow. But it is not my responsibility to help them along the journey. I can, of course, speak about my experiences, but they have to do the work themselves if they are truly and genuinely invested in learning more about it. I think that's important for them to do that work so that the burden doesn't fall on the people of color to do it for them.
I would also add the challenge with kind of, especially this past year when there were so many people who just all of a sudden found out that racism was actually an issue. For me, I just look at it from the context of history, because this is just the cyclical nature of history. Any social movement, particularly social movements around race, have been made aware to the public in a very enlightening way through, unfortunately, very tragic events or difficult events. I think about Emmett Till murder and how that sparked some understanding of things back then, or even just things that were happening prior to slavery sparked some heightened awareness. And so that's just the unfortunate nature of history around this work. And one of the things that was really, that the timing of this past year that made it interesting in particular was that obviously with everything shut down and obviously a lot of shows weren't on, people were forced to wrestle with race in a way that they never had to, because there's no entertainment, virtually not much entertainment. There is virtually not much to do. So people had to wrestle with this. And I think that's what was needed. Like, this time provided that space for people to really think more critically. I mean, obviously the pandemic has forced people to think critically about a lot of things. And I think just the reality of race was made a lot more clear. Now, the question is, will that remain clear? Because even since then, some of people's awareness has seemed to wane. People don't seem to be as interested in conversations about race as they were back in May or June. But I think it's frustrating that people just now knew about racism, but I just think about the cyclical nature of history. You need tragedy to heighten awareness.
I've got a question for you all. Samaya, you made a comment about, you know, not expecting, you know, Black folks to really do your education for you. Mm-hmm. And I wonder for all of you, Samaya, Jonathan, and Ethne, you know, what can you recommend that people do to take ownership of that knowledge, of that experience? You know, Jonathan, you just said, well, you know, people are starting to wane, you know, it's not as important anymore. Okay, we don't have to, this is pretty heavy. Can we move on to something else that's not as difficult? Well, some of us don't get to do that. You know, we have to live that every day, right? So how can we encourage folks to take on the work of learning? And, you know, how can we be gracious as people of color? How can we be gracious in that, you know, sometimes people don't know what to do. They feel like, oh, if I say something or do something, it's the wrong thing. You know, how can we lead them? How can we direct them?
I think initially you just have to continuously invite them in, put the information out there, and give them the opportunity to come at it at their own pace. I'm not in the business of trying to force it on people. They're going to either come for it or they won't. And I think just making sure that for people who are seeking to have and gain that knowledge, that they come at it understanding that it's going to be rough. Like, this is not a one and done. It's not something that you can just check the box on and say, oh, I read this book. Oh, I read this movie. Oh, I talked to my Black friend. That's not going to do it. It's going to take some internal introspection to undo years of what they've probably learned or heard or have been what's been brought up in their households. And they have to come to the table with the understanding that if they truly want to do this, they're going to have to do the work, and it's going to be hard. And they have to figure that out themselves. I can't do it for them.
But what can the organization do to sustain the energy? So like, I think this idea of, I think Jonathan used the term waning of focus, which I think we really did see, and continue to see, that it becomes difficult to keep people focused on these types of matters, especially people who are privileged and can turn their attention back to, you know, whatever it is that they were spending their time on before. And so my question is, organizationally, either at United Way or Cynthia, I'm sure you have some examples from some of the companies that we've worked with or that you've worked with prior to your time at Holistic. What are some things that the organization can do to keep the energy going?
Yeah, I would say the big thing is, I think number one, organization needs to be, if they don't have one already, really be actively working towards not just a committee, but some type of structure within an organization that's geared towards doing work around equity. And what I mean is, if there's a committee or working group formed, the work that they are doing around equity needs to be not simply just focusing on just having conversations about what's going on in the world, but really thinking about how do we create, look at the structures of our organization? How do we add this into our strategic plan? How do we think about, you know, when you think about equity within organizations, like there's different theories of change that influence how organizations will do equity and what space the organization needs to be in. I think those kind of conversations and focuses need to be had within organizations. And through that, you know, it would, if there's real conversations about the strategic planning around equity, it would be not just, oh, we're talking about race here and there. It's forcing people who work at the organization to realize, oh, if I'm going to work here, I have to think about this. I have to think about equity. So I might be doing fundraising work, and you could say, well, I'm just raising money. Well, if the organization is forcing everyone to look at their work and forcing organization to really work through internal structures, then regardless of what you do in the organization, you're going to be involved in this work. And then any new employee who comes in is going to know this organization is committed to equity. Here are the reasons. And so I really think the best way organizations can do this is not, conversations are great, talking about the things that are going on in the world are great, but really it's going to require work that doesn't feel as impactful right away, that can often feel slow, but is really sustainable work. And that's really looking to work with the strategic plan and looking at the whole organizational structure, making structural changes. And again, the biggest challenge I've seen is that it's easy to say, well, we're not doing anything, or we should just do all these conversations and events around racism, but that's not what's going to make people wrestle with it. Because it's easy, particularly people who work at progressive nonprofits, to feel okay having a conversation about racism and say, oh yeah, the George Floyd murder is bad, all these police shootings are bad. But what's really going to force people to think about it is say, okay, how am I as an employee at this nonprofit reinforcing this system? How am I benefiting from the system? So it's easy to say racism exists out there. It's much harder, but more important to talk about how racism exists within the institution, within that organization, because that's what's going to get people to actually have to wrestle with it.
Yeah, I want to echo everything that Jonathan said. I mean, the inertia that comes from sort of, I'm tired, this is heavy, it's real, but it is necessary. My white sisters and brothers, that we soldier on in spite of that, and that we do look at the systems and how they support equity or inequity, that you can change every heart and every mind that ever existed, and racism would still exist because it is in our systems, and it doesn't depend on you or I having a good heart or a bad heart. It's good to unlearn our own internal biases and our own racism, because we all have it. My white sisters and brothers in particular, but that we really look at those systems and how they impact and and this comes from HR systems, how does publishing or not publishing the salary, create inequity, right? How does, asking for salary history, support inequity and disadvantage people of color, right? It's really, and it's setting forth a plan for yourself. It's not just asking for people's good graces to come to a meeting or to read a book or to watch a movie. And all of those things also need to happen, but it's really setting some goals and some benchmarks and some expectations for your organization. And a lot of that is leadership, but you're also going to have a lot of good people in your ranks, as we do at United Way, who can help carry that work forward.
So let me follow up to that. So here's something that we wrestle with a lot with at Holistic, and I'll ask Cynthia to answer first, but then I'd also be interested in some guidance from the United Way team as well. So I'll give a specific example. This week we were talking about the ways that we measure and share back to our clients information about race and ethnicity, and some of the inherent challenges in terms of asking people to categorize themselves and sharing back like very basic information. So there's lots of challenges around people who identify as 2 or more races and how you express that. Anytime you give 5 categories and you ask a human being to pick one of them, that's problematic. We're talking about, the term BIPOC and all that goes into why that term has come into existence and is so necessary and things like that. And one of our teammates, Mike Bueno, whose birthday it is today, by the way, and we might sing happy birthday to him if he plays his cards right later. He pointed out that, just kind of this whole act of like asking people to categorize themselves in this fashion is an investment in the same white-centric racist systems that we're trying to combat. And that challenge, that conundrum is something that we face all the time. Like we're here trying to make progress, but it's very easy to kind of go back into this track of, even as we're trying to make progress, we're just making more investments in the same unfair systems because there's such momentum and inertia and historical institutional structures in place that it can be very difficult to do that. And you can do it very unintentionally and very easily. And so, Cynthia, I was hoping you could kind of comment about how we think about that and how we combat that challenge. And then for the team at United Way, I would also be interested to know how you all are endeavoring to not let that infect your efforts. Because I think that's really a big challenge that a lot of mostly white business leaders are facing, which is they feel like their intentions are pure, but they also see that very quickly they're kind of falling back into the same sorts of structures that were in place before.
Yeah, this is a topic that I could talk on and on about. I won't, but it's really interesting. What we try to do at Holistic is really take a holistic approach to helping people understand, who they are and share who they are without question. And, part of, one of the things that makes us really special at Holistic is that we use measurement. We measure data to help our clients, understand the employee experience. And, one of the things that we do is we ask people to identify themselves how they identify themselves. And that we don't tell them, to say you're whatever race or whatever ethnicity. We want you to just identify yourself as you identify yourself. So we take a lot of that data, however you might identify, as a parent, as a spouse, as a great leader, whatever. We take that sort of qualitative data and we, put it in our engine and we spit out, data points that really help to measure, measure those concepts. And, I think that's an act of inclusion in itself, because it helps people to feel heard, to feel like, okay, you don't really care about the color of my skin. You just want to know me for me. And that's how we do it. And we would like to sort of carry that movement throughout and let it catch on, because it's so important for people to feel like they can show up as their authentic selves.
Cynthia, that is exactly what you guys have been doing for us since you have we started our relationship, particularly with our annual engagement surveys. Our staff, I can tell you, and some of them are on the call now, were probably taken aback at first when they were starting the survey and they were asked some of those questions. We even got some feedback like, why are they asking these questions? Why do they want to know this? And we just encouraged them to answer authentically, however they wanted to answer that question. And it's been, I think, our second year now that we've asked these more inclusive types of questions, that people are gaining a greater understanding of why we're doing it. And we've gotten feedback since then that they do feel like we really are genuinely interested in who they are, who they identify with, versus us telling them or trying to place them in a box.